Tanski. I'm the Coastal Processing Specialist with the New York Sea Grant Program. For those of you that aren't familiar with Sea Grant, we're a marine research, education, technical assistance, and outreach program that's part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And here in New York, it's a joint venture of the State University of New York and Cornell University, that's who I work for. And we are part of a national program. We have 30 Sea Grant programs in each of the coastal states, all of them affiliated with an institution, one or more institutions of higher learning. So we are a nationwide program. And basically, our mission is to provide people, coastal residents, coastal stakeholders, with information they can use to make better decisions about the use, management, and conservation of our coastal resources. So I'm really happy to be here today to welcome you to this meeting on the use of living shorelines for coastal erosion control in a changing environment. I should point out another thing. We had an overwhelming response to this meeting, and we actually had to have a waiting list and turn people down. When we first started planning the meeting, we only had enough money to have half of this room, which is why we had the waiting list. Fortunately, the hotel did not have an event going on in that back half, so we're not all standing right next to each other in this room. That's why we have a lot more room than we had originally anticipated. And that's too bad, because I know a lot more people did want to come to this meeting, but that is the reason we had to limit the attendance here. But I'm glad you guys could all make it. Okay, now I think everyone in this room is well aware that erosion is a very important issue here in New York, and especially on Long Island. I think everyone's read the headlines that you see here, and everyone's seen the pictures of the destroyed houses, especially along the ocean coast. But over the last few years, with all the storms we've had, I think people are becoming much more aware of the problems that we're seeing in our more sheltered coastlines, the bays, the harbors, and the sounds. The storms there have done a tremendous amount of damage in terms of erosion and flooding. And you see scenes like this all the time these days. And one of the problems we have is a lot of our development, or most of our development, is found along the shorelines of the bays. It's not on the ocean front necessarily, it's on these more protected areas. So we are facing a lot of problems there. And what we find traditionally, our response to these problems is to use shore armoring or shore hardening structures. And there's a lot of different types of these structures. You can see some of them here. They might look a little bit different. They might be made out of different materials. But basically, they function the same way. They simply harden the shoreline against wave attack. They're not designed to do anything for the beach in front of them. And in fact, by preventing the erosion or migration, they can have other impacts on the shoreline. Some people say, oh, well, they actually increase erosion. That's not technically, that's a debatable issue. But what they do is in an area that is migrating, eroding landward, they prevent that migration from happening. And by doing that, you lose certain components of the shoreline, the intertidal area of the beach. And you can end up with a situation like this, which we often see on Long Island, where it starts having some adverse impacts on some of the biological and ecological resources that we're most concerned with. So when you put these structures in an area that is actively eroding, you can end up with essentially straight shorelines. So the question becomes, well, what can we do? What can we do better? And really in the past, when we talked about protecting upland property, infrastructure, and buildings, we could group, there's a bunch of techniques that you can use, but we could really group those into these three categories that you see here. You have the management techniques, non-structural, and structural techniques. Like I said, there's a bunch of different variations within them, but these are general categories that we used to use. And ideally, you prefer to use the management techniques. That's in a perfect world, you would not have roads, you would not have structures in an area that's affected by erosion or affected by flooding. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world. We live in New York. So you often see situations like this. Because of the past patterns of development, the density of development, a lot of those management techniques, relocation perhaps, or setbacks, are not that feasible for political, environmental or social reasons. And you have to start looking at other things that you can do. So we go back to, well, what are the options we have? And non-structural techniques work in certain areas, but not in other areas. So what people have been looking at now are kind of, you know, we also know that the armoring has its issues, but people are looking at combining the non-structural and the structural techniques, and combining these different things to form kind of a fourth category. The name of that fourth category is subject to a lot of debate. A lot of people use a lot of different names for this, and they all mean something a little different to the people. I'm not going to go into the definitions. I'll let some of the speakers do that. But you can see them called living shorelines, soft shorelines, sustainable, green, soft engineering, hybrid shorelines. As many names as there are, there's also different flavors of this type of approach. And if you look here, you can see there's everything from a very, very large-scale habitat or marsh, it's actually protection, restoration, not building, to relatively small-scale erosion control-oriented projects on smaller properties. So we have a variety of different types of living or green shoreline projects that can be done. Now, people have tried to come up with definitions. Here you can see some of the definitions for living shoreline 2 in particular. And what you see is they have very, well, I'm going to go out on the limb here. I'm going to say the living shorelines we're talking about have some common similarities or characteristics. And usually they're set up to provide erosion control benefits, and they do that by using vegetation, a combination of vegetation, fill, structures, either organic or otherwise. And one of the big things that's supposed to be part of these projects is that they're not supposed to disturb the coastal processes. They maintain coastal processes and provide habitat benefits. Now, there's varying degrees of the habitat benefits, but I think these are certain characteristic components of living shorelines that are important to keep in mind. No matter what they're called, there's an increasing demand for at least looking at this type of approach in New York. And these are two quotes, and this is especially true because of the talk about climate change and what might happen to the coast and how we're going to have to adapt. This top is a quote from the New York State Sea Level Rise Task Force. They called it soft engineering. I put the living shorelines in, but they said, look, we're going to have to evaluate those. We're going to have to start looking at those to counteract what's going on with sea level or increased rate of sea level rise. This bottom quote comes from the governor's 2001 commission on infrastructure, which was put together after Sandy to take a look at, make recommendations on what we should be doing about infrastructure changes so we can be more sustainable in 2100. And they specifically mentioned we have to look at living shorelines, at least in certain areas. So there is kind of an increasing interest and kind of a demand at the state level for doing things like this. Although there is that interest, we don't have a lot of experience with living shorelines here in New York. And that's not for lack of trying, at least on Sea Grant's part. Some of you old timers might actually remember that back in, it's 1995, actually I just realized it, 18 years ago, Sea Grant got together with the South Shore Estuary Reserve and we had a meeting. At that time, living shorelines, the term wasn't even coined, so we had this big long sentence. I'm glad someone did coin living shorelines so we didn't have to have this. Innovative uses of breakwaters and erosion control, integrating shoreline protection, estuarine habitat enhancement. Living shorelines, green shorelines, whatever. But that's what it was. So that was 18 years ago. And actually, we still have some of the same speakers today. But don't worry, at that time we had to use slides and a Kodak carousel. So you're not going to be seeing the downward advanced to PowerPoint. So hopefully you won't be seeing the same picture, but maybe. But this generated some interest in using this technique here on Long Island. And we actually developed a conceptual plan for a marina and ice lift that used these types of things. These pictures you might see, they've been around for quite a while. And with Scott Hardaway as a speaker today, we actually developed plans and specs for a site on the South Shore, on a Great South Bay at Dalton Point in the town of Babylon. And what we wanted to do was try to use this kind of new method to take a shoreline that looked like this, I don't know if you can see it, and make it look something like this. Well, for a variety of reasons, none of these projects got off the ground. But I don't think this effort was a total failure, because after we had the meeting, we did start to see some projects like this pop up, which might not be living shorelines per se, but they did contain components And they did make an effort to use the structures and some type of habitat to provide protection in areas. This is one that's out in Peconics, out in South Pole. And here's another one. You can see that it incorporated vegetation. And these have done really not too badly, even in some extreme events like Sandy. This is another one out in South Pole. You can see they have the vegetation. Now, post-Sandy, the marsh took a little bit of a beating here, but the whole system did what it was supposed to, did provide protection for that upland area. So we're starting to see people look at it, but we still don't have a lot of experience in this. We still don't have a lot of technical expertise here in New York. That's not the same in a lot of other states. In a lot of other states, they've been doing this for, it's going on about 30 years now. So you can see a lot of states in the South have spent a lot of time looking at these. They've built them, they've monitored them, they've tweaked them, they've been doing a lot of work. And they've built up a pretty extensive database of the do's and don'ts of using this type of approach in terms of how you site them, how you design them, how you build them, how you can monitor them, and how you can evaluate them. They're literally, if you go down to some of the southern parts of the country, there's hundreds of these types of projects that are already in place. So what I thought is, well, we don't know much in New York, but why should we try to reinvent the wheel? Let's take a look at what's happened down in the South, the experience they have. As I said, it's quite a bit, and we're lucky enough to have 4 speakers from the South that, I guess cumulatively, they've probably dealt with 500, 600 of these projects. And they've been nice enough, kind enough to come up and spend 2 days traveling and come up and share their knowledge and expertise with us. So we don't have to live through the same mistake. Well, I'm not going to say we're going to live through the same mistakes, I'm sure, but at least we'll have a leg up on what they had to go through, and hopefully we will be able to learn from them. So if you look, there's one other thing. Yeah. When I talked to the speakers and we were putting this together, one of the things that I was concerned about is I thought living shorelines cover such a broad spectrum and array, but I thought it was very important for us to take a look at the erosion control benefits and particularly try to focus on the smaller scale projects that might be done on the property owner or the local government level. We're going to talk about the range of things, but I said, look, this is one of the areas that we're concerned about because people are saying you should use living shorelines in these situations. We want to make sure if we are saying that we're using them, that we're saying the right things and doing it the right way. So that might be more of a focus than you would see in other living shorelines meetings where they're talking about total habitat enhancement as the primary purpose. So I did ask them to focus in that perspective, and that's just our take or our bias on that. It doesn't mean that living shorelines can't be used for the habitat enhancement, and indeed they have been used here in New York. But I wanted to make that clear. But if you look at the agenda, we're going to spend the morning south of the Mason-Dixon line having people come up and talk about their experiences, like I said, going back to at least 30 years with these structures. And these are people that have practical experience. It's not just that book learning. They've been out in the field and looking and actually seeing what happens. Then we're going to have lunch, and I suppose you all know more than I do about this ticket thing. You have a ticket and you have to put it on the table, and then they'll bring something to you for lunch. Then after lunch, we are going to move further up north, and we're going to talk about some of the projects that have been tried or started here in New York and the experiences we have in New York and what might be a little bit different than the other areas down south that we'll be looking at in the morning. And then we're going to end up with a panel session where we're going to discuss with some of the agencies and stakeholders, contractors, consultants, what some of the obstacles, challenges, and opportunities would be in terms of trying to use this approach here in New York. And hopefully that'll be the first step in a path to identify where we want to go with this. I think it's going to be a long path, but we have to get started, and I think we have a great start with the speakers that we have. So I'd like to thank them. I'd also like to thank the organizing committee. The people that you can see here, I'm not going to try to go through all their names. They put up with a lot of meetings, conference calls, and the regular nonsense that you have to go through when you're on a committee. I try to minimize it, but they were very, very helpful. providing guidance and input, and their guidance and input really improved this program, so I want to thank them. And I want to thank my staff too. Karen, who's out doing the registration, she's had to put up with a lot when I change things all the time, but there's a lot of people to thank. And also we have to acknowledge the New York Sea Grant, or the National Sea Grant Office that provided us some of the funding to get this